welcome to everyone with us today. My name is Maria Tranquilli, and I'm a program manager at NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. For those of you who may not know, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit dedicated to enabling entrepreneurs from all over the world to realize their maximum potentials and grow. As you may see in the chat, the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center, along with our partner Mentor Cloud, is launching a major new movement called Mentor Makers. Our aim is to have 1 million mentor hours banked by 50,000 mentors in support of entrepreneurs. Currently, 92% of small business owners agree that mentors have a direct impact on their success. Yet only 37% of small businesses have access to a mentor, and we want to change that. We ask you take a moment to tag one of your mentors on social media who have helped you along the way, and challenge a colleague or friend to do the same. Use the hashtag Tag a Mentor and Mentor Makers in the post and at NASDAQ Center. By acknowledging your mentors, we hope to encourage others to do the same. Be sure to include a photo or video to win a chance for you and your mentor to be featured on the NASDAQ Tower in Times Square. We will open up for live Q&A at the end of this event, so please submit your questions in the Q&A function or in the chat at the bottom of your screen throughout this presentation. And none of what we do could be possible without all of the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, Bank of the West, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer, BPM, NZTE, and Microsoft for Startups. We are humbled by their contributions. During these unique times, we are curious around sentiment and how you are feeling as entrepreneurs. We would like to start by taking 2 polls to see how you are feeling today. Launching poll number one, how are you feeling? Are you feeling fearful, anxious, surviving, or are you feeling optimistic? Please let us know. Wonderful. I see lots of poll results sharing those. We have a very optimistic group today. That's wonderful news. And our second poll, what is keeping you up at night? Is it finance, sales, marketing? Is it scaling, pivoting, your team, or surviving? Please let us know. I love seeing all these answers come in. All right, so I'll end the poll now. It looks like we are equally split between sales and marketing today at 24%. Everyone is in the right place. All right, sharing those results now. And I'll stop sharing those. Well, without further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our special guest speaker, Valerie Chan, founder and CEO of Platform PR's founder, and she is a TEDx speaker as well. Valerie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So we are going to cover some top takeaways today during this top tier PR tools and tactics. And Valerie, before you get started, I'll go through some of these takeaways. We know that storytelling is important. We know that PR and advertising are not synonymous. We know consistency matters, and we don't want to do PR in a vacuum. So Valerie, I hope that you're able to take this away and give us some of the additional top tier tactics that founders can use.
Great. Thanks so much, Maria, for having me. And I will share my screen. So just a second. So I prepared a couple of just 11 slides today, but I think they're highly meaty and definitely impactful. So let me just, there we go. Great. So today, a couple things just from an overview perspective, and Maria had let me know that you actually have the slides. We're going to be talking about the importance of storytelling and what that actually means, especially during the age of COVID. I'm happy to give a little bit more nuance after the call if people would like to have some conversations with me afterwards. Don't tell your story in a vacuum. PR education is education, not advertising, which is often misconstrued, believe it or not. I can go into a little bit about that as well. It's often conceived that PR is a press release, but the reality is that press release is just one vehicle, not the actual art of storytelling or public relations. I will be giving a case study about the impact of how to move sales forward through the use of PR in slide number 5. Details are super important, especially as an early stage startup. I'll kind of talk about the nuances of that and the importance of consistency in getting out your message. I'll also be talking about the importance of showing your personality, but don't overdo it. Because what may happen, especially when it comes to brand and brand image, is that you may damage the brand and you might have to course correct. And I'll be giving you a quick case study in this particular bullet. And then at the end, I'll talk about the importance of brand and the importance of assets, which is something that people really don't think about. They think about launching the company first, but then when people start searching for you, you know, sometimes you don't have the right assets or, you know, messages to bring an audience through to the sale. So those are the things I will be talking about today in this quick talk. So a couple of things first. You may be asking, well, why storytelling? So storytelling is super important because our brains remember stories more than they remember facts. And our brains are wired to remember like a really engaging story, one where you're absorbed and you can follow the through line. And just think of a really good book, even television, which seems to be very, very prevalent nowadays, or you know, stories on your Netflix or Amazon. And corporate storytelling is a little bit different. So a couple of things. One is that corporate storytelling revolves around the concept of a hero overcoming obstacles. You know, the idea is that there's actually 6 points in talking about storytelling, right? You're trying to connect with the customer. Who's your customer, and hopefully you've done persona work before you actually go out to market. And when you connect with a customer, you actually provide an emotional bridge to find ways to bring your product and your story forward. You know, the second point in creating a story is you paint a vision of what success looks like, right? And what that actually means, not just for the customer, but how you're going to solve the problem, right? And that's kind of the third step. So what are the obstacles that you're trying to, what the client is trying to actually go over, and how do you overcome the obstacles using your product, right, or service? So, and this is like when you actually talk about the solution in a problem-solving way. So the idea is to let the customer take the center stage and then basically ground the vision that you're talking about, that story that you're talking about in reality with evidence, facts that your product may or service may be able to solve, ways that your customer has been able to use your product or service, and then basically how other folks can benefit. So the idea of good storytelling, especially in a corporate context, lays the foundation for everything your target audience will think of in relation to your brand, which is why I talk about brand at the end. So a couple of things, especially given, you know, entrepreneurs like zest for telling stories and making sure that you bring your product to market. Your product actually may be solving a very complex issue, but it may not be appropriate now. You may have a product that solves a problem that's too early stage, right? People don't understand the problem, or maybe you're entering a crowded market. So the question is, okay, what do you do now? So one of the things that is actually missed, especially when we do talk to entrepreneurs, is that, you know, you're so excited about the product, you're so excited about the service, you actually miss the key trends that are actually happening right now that you could maybe glom onto to tell your story. So one of the things that we actually give counsel to our clients on is like, look at the trends. See how your product actually interacts with the trends that for the problem that you're trying to solve, you know, and see how you can interrelate and insert yourself in talking about the trends. Either, you know, maybe it's a trend that hasn't yet happened, or maybe it's something where you actually see it happening again. And, you know, a good example would be, I'm going to give a kind of a quick example later in the slides, but waste management, right? So waste management isn't something that is super sexy. In fact, you know, you throw your garbage into a litter bin and there you go. Not something to think about. But for many people, and actually for many governments and for you know, many municipalities, it actually costs dollars to collect all the waste bins around the city. So, you know, we worked with a company, NordSense, and I'll kind of talk to you a little bit more about them in a little bit, but we worked with them to tell a story that was kind of interesting now. And waste management has been solved, you know, has been talked about a wide variety of ways, but we looked at the trends to see, okay, AI-based waste management, who would find that sexy? What would that actually look like? Where can we glom onto in telling a trend? And, you know, we were able to actually work with the city of San Francisco to tell a very timely story by working with them and looking at what we can actually do to help clean up the city. So that was one example of how and why timing matters. Another entrepreneur, this is way back when, probably when many of you guys were still in diapers, but there was a company that we actually work with that was working with passwords. And this is when the internet was just starting. And he had a vision of collecting and putting all the passwords in one spot. You know, super helpful now, but 15, 20 years ago didn't actually matter. So that is too early stage. So always look at where you can where you can actually insert yourself and how your product actually can matter based off of the trend. And the idea here is that PR is education, not advertising. And when you're working with a journalist, you know, an influencer or whatnot, even a broadcaster, the idea is not to sell them something, it's to be a resource. Because being a resource, you can comment on or opine on what you see the market is trending using your background as a founder for a particular timely story. So the idea then is, okay, you're able to talk about not just your knowledge, but how your product can be in context to what's actually happening in the world. And so public relations and communications is about really talking about the vision and the company's potential about the problem that you're trying to solve. You're able to forecast what a trend looks like, you know, roll up your sleeves and, you know, be able to talk again and again and again about your story by looking at the trends, you know, and inadvertently, yes, it is selling, but it's selling a different way because you are a resource and people are coming to you as the knowledge expert, not as the salesman, right? And they want to know more and they want to lean into what you're actually saying. So the question is, what is a press release, right? Press releases are just one vehicle of what communications can use in your tool belt to actually influence influencers, media, as well as social media. So, you know, there's a particular formula to a press release and different formulas, especially for social media releases, but it's just one vehicle to basically tell people what you're doing And the idea of communications, of public relations, is around telling the entire story of what you're trying to promote. So, oftentimes, especially with founders, especially with early stage companies, you leave it at just a press release, but a press release is just the first starting point in a way to get visible, and the way to be truly effective, especially with PR, is to maintain visibility through a wide variety of coverage on an ongoing basis. So PR isn't just a press release, right? It's just the initial step. And it's part of the overall marketing mix that I'm sure the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center has actually taught you. But this is top of funnel if you look at the marketing funnel, right? So, and we're working with a variety of different media in different formats. Like it could be a Facebook Live video. It could be like something that you see on TV. It could be an interview like with a journalist on a podcast. It could be a news article. It could be a features article. That is the realm of what communications actually works with, not including crisis and some of the other types of communication vehicles. But that's initially, especially as an early stage startup, what you are concerned about. And going back to don't do PR in a vacuum, PR shouldn't be the only thing you do when you launch your company, right? PR should actually be part of a multifaceted marketing program that you put together so that you could actually move people down funnel, down the marketing funnel so that it can convert into a lead. So one of the things that we actually get kind of bombarded with, especially by our clients and by other folks who are curious about PR, how do you measure PR? Well, we do have tips and tricks to actually measure a press release and pickup, but there are different formulas for understanding whether or not communications and PR actually works. You could do a share of voice report over 4 to 6 weeks, or 4 to 6 months, or even a year, and do a look back of, okay, here's the competitors that I actually was coming up against. Here's where I measured when we first started. Here's where we measured after we started doing PR. You could do, say, even a report on, okay, I'm trying to do conversions, right? And do a conversion of like downloads for trials, and using PR and a PR strategy, you could find ways to actually increase those downloads. So, those are just two measures. There's a variety of other measures. You could look at Google Analytics. You could look at some of the other tools. But anyway, I kind of digress here. But I wanted to let you know that PR is measurable, even though people may tell you that it's not measurable, right? It's just to increase brand exposure. It's actually measurable. But the goal here, actually, especially as a founder in an early stage company, is to find an audience that cares about your product and service. And I'm not talking about, okay, let's get TechCrunch, let's get, all the venture capital publications or business press. We get a lot of requests for business press. The question is, what is actually going to move the needle to get you selling in the right areas, or at least interest in the right areas to attract your customers? And there's a wide variety of different media, like I talked about earlier. I kind of wanted to give you an example of the different types of features and functionality that media can have, and how and when you can actually mix and match your quote unquote stories that you put out there. There's PR-driven features, which are things that your PR company does. They're company-generated ideas. You're trying to talk about company growth or tell a founder stories, right? There are articles, opinions, and feature-length stories that you put out there, so you can pitch a member of the media about, hey, I have an idea for this particular trend, and my client can be a resource. There's product reviews that actually goes over the features and functionality from a detailed perspective in a ZDNet, for example. And there's product-focused, topics-focused, company-focused stories that could talk about other initiatives that the company might be doing, like a, like an what is it called? A D&I type of initiative. And there's other types of stories as well. So in situations like this, I know that especially with early stage startups, the idea of like getting news now, sometimes you won't get these types of features in actual media for 1 to 2 months, 3 months, 6 months if you're working with like the New York Times or like even as CNBC for a longer format type of piece. But at the end, the question is, does that move the needle for your particular product, and it doesn't move the company forward? There's also media-driven features, kind of what we've seen with the election, for example. Obviously it's timely given everything going on in the world, but the media drives it. So it's a story that the reporter's already working on, and they're looking for resources, and how do you play a role? So the idea is that, we pose you, the company, as a contextual research, as a guest to provide commentary. So you provide contextual analysis and data. The only thing though, in these types of features is that you have limited control over the story outcome. You could be included or you could not be included. Sometimes you cannot control what the narrative is, which, if you're a B2B client, may not be as favorable, but it could be favorable. You just don't know. So the idea here is that you need to be okay with what the media says. And then lastly, there's PR-driven content, which are, the press releases, the blogs, it's designed to generate short-term coverage. But this is the content that you actually create on an ongoing basis. So yeah, the details matter. So I had mentioned the company NordSense as our example, but I wanted to show you the variety of different coverage that we got. We got broadcast coverage, we got business coverage, we got entrepreneurial type of coverage, right? And well, they're a great client. The one that moved the needle was the Waste Today. And I bring that up because the Waste Today piece of coverage and the editorial that mattered actually got shared a lot. And it brought them a bunch of clients and a lot of prospects. So just because you have the Cheddar's of the world, the Forbes, the broadcast, the Wall Street Journal, it doesn't necessarily translate into the customers that you're looking for or the prospects. You just got to target the right press. So going back to the 3 buckets that I showed you, the idea here is to be consistent in getting visibility. You can actually create an interesting, content timeline of who you want to be, where you want to go by looking at your business plan and doing a work back. Okay, you want to be known as something else in 5 years. Okay, what does that look like in the first year? What type of message do you want to get out there? How can you weave that yourself into that message, and make sure you're a resource? What does year 2 look like? What are those types of stories? And there's actually a formula from you as you move from early stage to late stage on how to be consistent in getting visibility. But I can tell you this much: one article isn't going to help you. It will help for the short term, but not the long term. And it's only if it's a right article, and that happens in a blue moon. So, our advice is to use different formats to move the needle. And then this is kind of an interesting one. And I bring it up because personality does matter, especially when you're being a resource to many press people and many thought leaders, in the sense of it could help you or hurt you. So how do I actually explain that a little bit more in detail? Okay, so if you talk about yourself a lot, you talk about your product in a conversation, and all you're doing is selling, I can tell you right now, the media won't want to talk to you on an ongoing basis unless it's really interesting, because all you're trying to do is peddle your product. So, when you have those conversations with press, when you have those conversations with, thought leaders, the idea is to help them and be a resource. How can I help you today? Thank you for interviewing me about what I'm trying to say. How can I be a resource for you today? And so show a little bit about your personality, but don't be overly offensive. And at the same time, don't let your personality and actions undermine your company. And I bring up SoulCycle as a great case study, just in the sense of, Melanie Whelan actually was a really great company and business visionary and helping grow the company, first coming from Equinox and then taking SoulCycle into the, hundreds of millions of dollars it is today. That said, she kind of used brute force to actually get her message right. So there was brand inconsistency to what SoulCycle was trying to peddle, which was the hip, excited, soul-filled person, to what was actually happening behind the scenes. And what happened was that eventually, especially when like Stephen Ross, who's the overall chairman of Equinox and of SoulCycle, did a misstep, it kind of brought to light the company as a whole and really what was SoulCycle's brand value, right? What does that actually look like? And so they were trying to find ways to pivot at that point. And because of her personality, because of the culture, and there was inconsistency, essentially she, quote unquote, resigned, but in actuality, it was a mutual decision. But what came out later was the fact that she actually had a variety of different things that and traits that actually promoted a toxic work environment. And on top of it, the last straw was that she was giving $5,000 Dior handbags and taking $750 helicopter rides in the Hamptons. So, it made you realize, okay, is the personality consistent? Are you actually helping, right? So yes, absolutely. Little things really do matter. And the idea is make sure your personality stays on message and on brand. And this is the last slide. So what does that look like? Obviously, PR is top of funnel. It's part of the overall marketing mix. The idea here is that, you are actually improving and helping further the brand. So all the other components of marketing need to actually support top of funnel, right? So make sure your website's done. Make sure you know the look and feel of your company. Make sure that you understand and have assets afterwards so you could follow up with your company, and then craft a narrative around that of who you want to be, how you want the external world to see you, just from your stories as well as your brand. And the idea here, especially as you create your stories for communications, is to make sure that everything is consistent and that you have, positive communications with your marketing experience. So, the idea is not to have a myopic viewpoint and think that brand's going to happen, further down the line. When you start talking to the media, when you actually start doing interviews, and you start thinking about really what your story is and what you want to get out there, make sure your brand is consistent to that. Because they're going to be starting to associate emotion with what you say and then be looking for you. And the idea is making sure that your brand is consistent. So look and feel is not the same of marketing. Obviously, marketing should support the brand, but branding and storytelling and marketing all go hand in hand. So that is what people are going to be left with: your brand, your story, your message. So, and it helps with SEO. And so that is the end of the presentation. I have kind of left a lot on the table so that I could answer a bunch of questions, but in the meantime, feel free to ask away, and I'm sure to help you.
Valerie, thank you so much. What an excellent overview. Oh my goodness. And just to say, everyone that is with us today, thank you so much for submitting your questions and for asking whether or not this will be available in video form. Yes, it will. And the slide deck is available. We'll ask our amazing production manager, Isis, maybe you can pop the link in the chat for the slides as well. So everyone can have that in real time. So Valerie, again, thank you so much. A lot of people are saying how excellent and super helpful this session has been thus far. So we ask all of you, please submit your questions in the chat and or the Q&A function. I have about probably 15 questions in the queue. And what I will do is combine some of those questions so we make sure we get to everyone. So Valerie, are you ready to answer some questions here?
I am, thank you.
Okay, great, great. So we have a great question from Jessica, who is in the audience. What do you believe is the best way to pitch contributed content?
That's a great question. So we actually, so I guess I need a little bit of clarification, because yes, I could give a general answer, and then I would love to give a little bit more of a specified answer. So people are not going to look. Let me back up. A lot of folks who actually pitch contributed content, they basically do subject line, and then they put blah, right? There's no intro on what the contributed content actually is about. So we recommend doing like a 3-line pitch about what it is, how you're going to be a resource, and what people will actually see. And then you could do a snippet afterwards of your writing style and then submit. And if if a publication is interested, they'll get back to you. That's the commercial and generic answer on how to get contributed content. But the question is, and I actually would pose this back to you, is what do you want to do with a contributed content? So just because you're providing a contributed piece doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to resound with your audience. And how does a topic actually get a person, coming back to you? So what is that end message that you're trying to promote, right? So when you actually write a contributed article, make sure that you have a leave behind on how and what a person needs to think about and where people can find you. And, they'll be looking for you because you provided such great tips.
Thank you so much, Valerie. And Jessica, if you're still with us, please maybe give us a few other details. Valerie can even more specifically answer your question like she had mentioned. So you can just chat that to us. We'd be happy to re-up this question later in the Q&A. Lots of questions pouring in. Thank you all so much. So Valerie, from Keith, he says, this is a great chat. Does media still care about product announcements or new customer announcements? Do you like the idea of the CEO blog to capture such news, but in a fun way?
Wow, okay. Those are a lot of questions, so I might ask you to break those down. So it depends on the media, right? So yes, they still care about product announcements. Yes, they still, customer announcements, it just depends on the type of customer, what vertical you're in, and how you're using the customer. So there's different ways to spin the customer announcement so that it could be in the form of a case study that you could pitch to a CIO journal, because I know a lot of folks are kind of interested in that, a CIO, or use your customers to your advantage and pitch the customer. So that's a way to actually do it. And then the third question was about the blog. I didn't catch that. Could you ask the question again, Maria?
Absolutely. So Keith is asking, do you like the idea of a CEO blog to capture this kind of news, but in a fun way?
yes and no, right? So it's interesting if it comes from a CEO. Like typically, we'd love to see the CEO talk about vision, talk about the future, and talk about maybe if you wrap up wrap up your what your customers are doing into a forward-looking piece. But a CEO blog should talk about all the trends that are happening right now. It should talk about like how you should be thinking about the market your way and on how you actually view the market. It should be more forward looking.
I love that. So positioning the CEO as the thought leader of maybe multiple industries and leaving
Correct.
the PR. Yep, that's great, Valerie. Thank you so
Mhm.
much. We have quite a few questions. I'd say 2 or 3 questions around editorial calendars.
Mhm.
So hold on one moment. Let me just see. So we have a question. I'll combine these questions. Do you have a PR calendar? I use the content calendar for my social posts, and I'm wondering if there's a resource or some kind of calendaring PR for consistency's sake. What might you recommend?
Huh. So that's a really great question. There are a wide variety of media tools that you can use that are paid. But and typically you pay a PR agency to find those editorial calendars, but to like true story, just because you have those paid access to editorial calendars doesn't necessarily mean that it's always accurate. So the best way to look at editorial calendars, especially for the audience that you're trying to reach, is to go on the website and look for the editorial calendar. That way it's typically in an advertiser's package, and then you're able to see the mix of both paid as well as earned coverage that you can insert yourself into. The other thing is like editorial calendars are great just in general. However, it doesn't tell the full picture, right? So going back to what I had mentioned earlier in the slides, looking at, creating the work back of where you want it to be known and how you want to be known, creating your own editorial calendar to move your story forward, and then layering in that piece as one piece of what you're trying to pitch into whatever the particular month is actually how you could use the editorial calendar appropriately, and then pitching the individual reporters the way that you want to garner relationships with and want to be a resource with, in addition to those overall features which are more long lead. So like Financial Times, for example, would have an editorial calendar. New York Times has an editorial calendar simply for paid. But they do have other features as well. Wall Street Journal has a calendar, right? But then there's other publications that don't. So.
Thank you so much, Valerie. And I think a great follow-up question here might be, how do founders or small business owners find those reporters or those columnists or those in charge of the editorial calendars in said company? So what are your recommendations for finding the contacts to actually pitch to? We have quite a few
Okay.
on this.
Yeah, so a couple things. You look at the editorial masthead of, say, an Information Week, for example, or CIO. There's an About Us or not typically the Contact Us, but there's also About Us, and then it'll bring up all the staff, and then you could look at the masthead there, so that you could find the appropriate person to actually pitch to. What's kind of interesting is that typically features, especially for editorial calendars, there is a research assistant who sometimes manages that, and then there'll be an editor associated with who the feature is, or you could ask the research associate for the editorial calendar. But for topics, subject areas, that sort of a thing, there's normally a beat editor, especially for technology. And then also for newspapers or wire services, broadcast a little bit different because there's generally, depends on the station, but there's different people that handle different segments as well. So being able just to comb the the site of the news outlet that you're trying to get to find the appropriate contact. And for broadcast in particular, there's it's contacting the producers, not the hosts themselves. So.
Thank you so much. We have so many questions about how to find those contacts. So for everyone that, if you have any lingering questions specifically about that, please continue to submit them. Hopefully we'll get those answered in the time we have remaining. Valerie, thank you so much. I think that was a fantastic answer. And maybe pivoting a little bit towards metrics. I know we have quite a few questions here about metrics. So to ask on behalf of this audience, what are some key metrics that early stage companies should be using to measure PR? And perhaps a follow-up question would be, in addition to that, what if we are pre-product launch? What are some metrics that we might use to gauge interest in customer engagement? And I would actually say probably post-product launch as well. Do you have any suggestions on what metrics founders should be using to measure?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I recommend Google Analytics. I mean, that's the easy answer, just because you can tell it's going to go to your website traffic. The other thing is going back to the most effective product launches. It depends on if you're B2B and B2C. You know, it's definitely a different audience. I think there have been a case. The best way to answer this question is by looking at a couple of case studies that we've done for metrics specifically. In terms of measurement, I bring up that one client example where this particular client wanted to understand trials and wanted to actually measure the amount of trials. So we put together a strategy to actually just target the publications and the wire services and the outlets that had a high circulation number, in addition to partners, and syndication. So there are specific outlets that actually focus on syndication and syndicated content. So our strategy was just to target those publications and those outlets and those like broadcast types of outlets as well, so that they could actually increase their audience in addition to increase their amount of downloads and trials. So we focused on trials for that. So, and then we made sure that all of our coverage was geared towards that. So we took a measure of what the trials were previously. We took a measure of third-party resources. So you could actually measure, especially with Google Analytics and some of the other measurement tools out there for marketing, you know, do a baseline measure to see whether or not the PR is effective. And then we took an after measure as well. And we would look at it on a monthly basis. But that's, you know, that's a really good case study of, okay, what can you do? What are where are the places that you can measure? Typically, you know, like a lot of people, there's another company that we worked with that was looking, they were pre-product, so this answers one of the questions, and they actually wanted to increase visibility in this particular vertical market, and they actually focused primarily on PR and telling the right story. So it's a mixture of feature stories, interviews, press releases, podcasts, speaking opportunities, and they didn't have a funnel. And so not just by website statistics, but also like where did the leads come in and who were asking for trials and what was the inquiry like. So we measured, you know, Google Analytics was the first start, and then we measured the amount of leads coming in the door, and then we measured where it went from there. And so then we were able to figure out, okay, here's the metric, here's the type of story we actually need to look at to move them more downstream down the funnel to close.
Valerie, thank you so much. I find that our community loves those case studies, and we are hearing, you know, that this is a great presentation. It's so helpful. Everyone is so very grateful and thanking you. So Thank you all for those comments. Of course, keep them rolling in. It is super helpful for NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center and for Valerie to hear your feedback. And if I can mention, we actually have a survey that we would love for you to fill out for both Valerie and NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center to continue to offer you free resources such as this one. Let us know what you're most interested in, and we will absolutely make sure that programming is available to you for free. Valerie, are you willing to continue with some Q&A?
Absolutely. I left more time open just because I knew that there was a lot of questions previously that you guys had with another seminar that you provided. So I thought there might be a lot more questions that my slides would spur. So I left it a little bit open. So absolutely.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. So I would love to tee you up with this question that we get often at NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center from our community. What are some top tips and how might we distinguish between B2B and B2C businesses, and how do we approach PR differently for B2B versus B2C? This might be a large topic, so feel free to break it down however you like.
Yeah, so let me break it down. For what's the difference between B2B and B2C. So for those people that think that B2B budgets are a lot smaller than B2C, you are mistaken. They're about the same. Depends on what you want to do with the B2C budget, and depends on whether or not your product is super interesting and what you're trying to get at. For a B2C audience, specifically, the question is, what and who are you trying to target, and what are the most effective means that you can do? Yes, you can spend a ton of money on a B2C budget, but you don't necessarily have to. So companies can do a lot of different things with B2C budgets. So typically with a B2C budget, yes, you can't overspend, but B2B also spends a lot too. It's harder to get media, period. You are competing with a wide variety of folks, and you're trying to get consumers, and your purchase point typically is smaller than, say, a B2B company. And you're looking at Facebook, and typically, and the reason why I say it's not a larger spend is because it's a mixture of paid, earned, and owned, and you do a lot more with paid, and you do a lot more than earned. So I just want to preface it as that. And B2C, primarily to get the most amount of bang, is actually paid, believe it or not, and paid and SEO searches, et cetera, et cetera. And it's Facebook ads, it's Insta, paying for thought leadership, it's paying for, ads or product placements, in addition to making sure the visibility is there for your particular product with consumers that you're trying to attract. For B2B, it's different. So B2B, people are looking more for a thought leadership position on earned. And that means that there's more of a budget to create those thought leadership pieces, more of a budget to actually get CEO interviews and executive interviews to talk on a wide variety of topics. So you're going to see your executives at speaking conferences, even virtual conferences for that matter. You're going to see you're going to see yourself talking to a wide variety of publications. You're going to create a lot more content than you would typically a B2C. It's just a different message. It's more long form than it is short form. So, and honestly, for B2B specifically, depending on the type of product that you're trying to actually promote out there, you're gonna do it on multiple vertical markets. Like you're going to try to target multiple vertical markets. So. Hopefully that helps.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much. I know. So
too detailed, but
no, I was just going to say, if anyone has follow-up questions in our audience, please feel free to ask. Valerie, that was an excellent overview. I know that we have so many questions. How do we distinguish? What are the strategies moving forward for B2B versus B2C? So thank you so much for answering this. Mm-hmm. And we have time for one or two more questions. Let's see from our community. We've answered. So Christine, I know you asked a question specifically about your podcast. I think that may have been answered in a previous question. Let us know. Do we have, let us see. Oh, this is a great question. Do you have suggestions for how we reach out for PR without coming across like a salesperson? I think you mentioned this a little bit earlier, Valerie, but maybe you can expand a little bit more.
Yeah. So through it's education. So like, hey, this is a good pitch, right? Hi, XYZ. Saw you were writing on the topic of blah, right? I wanted to give you another perspective. That's an easy way to actually do it. And then, or I saw you mentioned, or I saw you were writing about X. Here's what I thought was interesting. Here are other, would you consider other ways of looking at this? And then talk about the product benefits that you're trying to promote, right? Or what customers have done with it. So it's not blatantly a product pitch. Another example would be the DevOps example. Sorry, it's kind of a random one, but typically, if you're looking for being a resource, you can check out Haro, which is a free subscription so that you can provide yourself as a resource. But typically clients are like, hey, here's one line and here's a lot about my product. Instead of talking about a lot about the product, talk about, okay, here's what customer X did. Don't even mention your product. And then here are some things to consider for DevOps managers, ... And yes, you come from a product company, but what happens is that you're talking about nothing related to your product. All you're talking about is how the DevOps person can be benefited, right? And it's formed in a tip. So that's how you talk about your product.
Valerie, thank you so much.
Yep.
As we wrap up today, what might you share as words of wisdom for our audience?
There's so much. I mean, definitely the story matters. It's not just a one-trick pony. I think that's the biggest thing. Like once you're visible, don't pretend that you're not visible. People will try to find you, and SEO is super important. So PR actually helps you go up in the search rankings, right? So be consistent with how you market yourself and how and what you actually say. And then not just in terms of how often you go out and quote unquote market yourself, but also who you are as a person, your founders, and be consistent with your brand. So those are the top tips. And if you have any other questions, just feel free to email me.
That is very kind, Valerie. Perhaps you would be willing to put your email in the chat if that works for you.
Sure.
And we can provide that also with the slide deck and the video recording in our follow-up resources email. So everyone, make sure you look out for that. Valerie, I would love to offer a sincere thank you for being on our platform, for taking the time to speak to our incredible community of founders and entrepreneurs, to share your insights. We are so grateful, and on behalf of NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center and everyone in attendance today, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So for those of you that are still with us, please take 2 to 3 minutes to fill out the survey that we have posted in the chat. It is of utmost importance for us to know exactly what you're looking for so we can bring additional experts like Valerie or Valerie back to share additional wisdom with you. And if you are available, we would love to invite you to join us for an upcoming webinar or two. Tomorrow, we are actually hosting an incredible veteran founders panel on risk, funding, and innovation tomorrow, 4 p.m. Pacific time. Our Mentor Makers live event is this Thursday at 8 a.m. Pacific time. And we have an event on SPACs in 2020 with NASDAQ, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer on Thursday, November 19th, starting at 11 a.m. Pacific time. Again, thank you all for joining us today. A warm and grateful thank you. And we hope to see you soon at future events. Thank you all.